2020, a 17-year-old named Sam, who was an avid outdoorsman, decided to go on a one-night hike in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona. The mountain's name has a bunch of supposed origins, but the one that's generally accepted is people are afraid of the Superstition Mountains because of all the mysterious deaths that have occurred there. And so because people would avoid these mountains in fear of mysterious death, it became these superstitious mountains. But Sam was not superstitious and regularly came out here to go hiking, in particular on this 8-mile loop that went through a canyon. And so this one night overnight he planned on doing was going to be on that 8-mile loop where he'd do 4 miles in, camp out, and then 4 miles back. And he planned to do it with a friend, but his friend at the last minute canceled, and so Sam teetered on not even doing it, but ultimately decided, okay, I'll just do it by myself because I'm very familiar with this area. On the day he was supposed to go do this hike, he had planned on getting there early in the day to have maximum lighting, but due to some unforeseen circumstances and traffic and bad road conditions, he didn't get to the trailhead until 5:45 p.m. that night. Sam knew it was a bad idea to start this hike so late because he was going to run out of daylight. He probably was not going to make it 4 miles to the point where he planned on camping out. But he figured with his good health and fitness, he could probably quickly make his way to the 2 or even 3 mile mark, and there were some suitable campsites there. And so he decided he would kind of risk it and just try to go as fast as he could and use the daylight he had to reach a suitable campsite. But he wasn't able to move as fast as he thought he could, and soon the sun was down and it's totally dark, and he's got his flashlight, but that only is able to shine like 10 feet in front of him. And then at one point he nearly falls off of this rock, and he knows had he fallen, he would have gotten really badly hurt, and he's 15 miles away from the nearest help, and he's in a bad cell phone service area, and the roads getting out here are treacherous. No one knows exactly where he is, and it dawns on him that you've made a pretty bad choice, and you should stop right now and make camp here and not try to risk it any further. And so as it happened, where he was, there was this forest right nearby, and he could see there was a clearing about 30 feet off the path when he shined his light. And so he walked into that clearing, and he found it was a great spot to make camp. And in fact, on the edge of this clearing was the remnants of a fire pit. It was very old, but it at least showed someone had camped out right here, and they seemed to have made it just fine. So suddenly he was feeling pretty smart, and he felt pretty good about where he was staying for the night. Now, Sam intentionally did not bring a tent. He liked to sleep on a sleeping pad with a sleeping bag over that, and then he would string up a tarp over the top of him in case it rained. And since this clearing was surrounded by a bunch of pine trees, he was able to string up his tarp over the top, and it was perfect. And pretty soon he had a fire going, and then he cracked open a can of beans, and he began eating his dinner. And as he was eating, he started to get a sense that something was off, something was not right. He began scanning the tree line as if he was going to find something out of the ordinary, but his visibility was incredibly limited because he was sitting right up against a fire. And if you've ever sat next to a fire in a dark forest, your visibility is like 5 feet in a circle around the fire. You really cannot see beyond that. And his vision was also limited by all the pine trees that encircled his clearing. So he really could only see what was immediately around him, nothing else. And he starts thinking, that's gotta be it. Maybe I'm just nervous because I have no visibility. But as he's rationalizing this kind of bad gut feeling, a rock the size of a marble comes soaring into the campsite and lands at his feet. And he looks down at the rock, and immediately he connects that to that sense of dread he had. And he's looking around a little more aggressively now, but again, his vision is very, very limited. And so for the next 15 minutes, Sam is really aggressively scanning the tree line and listening really intently, and he doesn't hear anything, he doesn't see any more rocks get thrown. And so he begins to rationalize and convince himself that there's nothing wrong here. That feeling I have, oh, don't worry about that. He starts telling himself, I must have kicked a rock. That's what it is. Or maybe a rock fell off a tree. But either way, it's something totally explainable and you got nothing to worry about. And after a little while, he convinced himself and he got into his sleeping bag under his tarp and he went to sleep. A couple of hours later, Sam wakes up and he has that same sense of dread, and now it's back with a vengeance. And he can't hear anything, he can't see anything, but he's definitely feeling like something is wrong. And at that moment, as he's listening really intently and looking really carefully, he hears the sound of rustling leaves. It sounds like someone walking through leaves about 30 or 40 meters away from his campsite. And initially, he can't tell if this person or animal is walking towards his campsite or away, but over the next 30 seconds or so, the sounds start to fade, and he convinces himself that, okay, they've left and everything's fine. But just in case, he wanted to grab his flashlight and shine it in that direction, and so he reaches next to him where he had left it when he had gone to bed a couple hours earlier, and he can't find his flashlight. He's looking around for it, and he can't find it, and he's like, man, that's weird. I had it right here, right next to my body, and it's not here anymore. And that's when the alarm bells start going off in his head, because the only way this flashlight moves is if he moved it. And if it's not here, how did it move? And so he jumps out of his sleeping bag, he ducks out from under the tarp, and he's looking around on the ground in the immediate vicinity of where he was sleeping to find this flashlight. And as he's looking, out of the corner of his eye, he sees some light. And he turns his head, and in the same direction that he had heard those footsteps, those rustling leaves, when he was still laying down, he sees his flashlight laying on the ground about 10 meters away, which means someone or something had been less than a foot away from him to get this flashlight that was right next to him while he was fast asleep and totally helpless, and had moved it all the way over there. And immediately, Sam thinks to himself, that's a trap. They are trying to lure me away from my campsite. Suddenly, he felt so scared he wanted to vomit, but he knew in order to survive this situation, he needed to keep his wits about him. So he puts his boots on and he grabs his knife, and he knows he's not leaving this campsite. In fact, he's going to build the biggest fire he can. He's going to stoke that fire as big as he can get it, and he's not going to go anywhere near that flashlight. For the next several hours, Sam just stood in the middle of his campsite holding his knife, preparing to confront whatever the heck is out in the woods. And over those several hours, he would hear footsteps approach his campsite, turn around, and leave. Every time the fire got lower, he noticed they would come closer and closer and closer, and when he would stoke the fire, they wouldn't come as close. But at about 3 a.m., he ran out of firewood, so unless he went into the woods to get more, he'd be out, and he's certainly not going into the woods. That's the whole point, is to avoid the woods where this thing is. And so as the fire died down, Sam prepared himself mentally for whatever happened next, because he knew that with that fire gone, this thing was comfortable coming all the way in, coming all the way up right next to him to get the flashlight. And so finally, he hears the footsteps approaching, and before this, the closest they had come was maybe about 15 meters away. They were far enough away it didn't feel intimate. It was terrifying, but he had some distance. This time, they walk right up to about 3 meters away, but they intentionally come behind the thickest group of trees, so he can't see them. And it's still dark outside, and he's in that bubble of light near the fire, so he's blind to whatever's on the other side of those trees. But he knows they're there, and they've stopped. And for 2 hours, this poor kid is standing in the middle of this campsite, facing in the direction of whatever is behind the trees. Probably his imagination is going crazy at this point with what could be behind those trees, just waiting for whatever happened next. But ultimately, the only thing that would happen is the sun would eventually come up, and right before it actually popped over the horizon, this thing on the other side finally moved, it turned around and ran away, and it did not come back. And so when the sun finally did come up, Sam didn't just charge out of there because he's still thinking there could be a trap. He waited until it was totally full sunlight, and then he packed up everything he had, and he practically sprinted back to the parking lot, back into his car, and he drove nonstop for 20 miles until he got to a gas station where he could park and collect himself. And when he got there, he got out of his car and he went in and he got a drink. And when he came out, he noticed someone had written something on the dust on the back window of his car. And he walks over and it just says, "Sleep well?" ? Sam is confident whoever was stalking him at his campsite is the same person or group of people that wrote this message on his car. And now Sam just wonders, what would have happened if I retrieved that flashlight? In 1982, a very outdoorsy teenage girl and boy who had recently started dating decided to go camping in Maine. Around 1 a.m. on the first night they were there, the girl wakes up because she has to go to the bathroom, and she's about to unzip her tent when she stops because she hears some strange noises coming from outside their tent. It wasn't that loud, but it sounded distinctly like something was digging in the ground. But she really had to go, and she figured, you know what, it's probably just some small animal or something. And so she begins to unzip the tent, and there's a little bit of moonlight that night, and there was a clearing outside of their tent. So the moonlight's pouring through, so she has plenty of illumination. And so she looks through this tiny hole, and she can't believe what she sees. It is a grown woman squatting down about 2 or 3 feet away from their tent. Her back is to them, so she can't see that she's looking through the tent, and she's feverishly digging into the ground in front of her. The girl literally falls backwards into her tent. She's so startled by what she sees, and she lands on her boyfriend, who immediately gets up, and he's like, "What's going on?" And she goes, "Shh," and she points at the little hole where she had unzipped the tent, and she goes, "Look." The boy is confused, but he can tell his girlfriend is very serious, so he sits up quietly and he looks through the little opening in the door and he sees the digging woman. The boy recoils and looks at his girlfriend and he's like, "What is going on out there?" He takes a flashlight and she's telling him, "Don't do it." And he opens up the tent a little bit more and he aims his flashlight directly on this woman. And this gets her attention and she stops digging and she stands up slowly and she turns around and faces them and she's got no expression. She's not giving them any indication why she's there. She's not acting aggressive. She's not acting scared. She's just completely neutral. And she stands there staring at them for quite a while before turning around and just walking away from their campsite. And after a little while, when they were pretty certain she was gone, they open their tent all the way, they go outside, they kind of scan around with their flashlights and she's nowhere to be found, and they go to where she was digging, and it's just this weird 4-inch deep hole in the ground. There's no rhyme or reason to why she was doing that. And so after sitting there wondering what they should do, they settled on, well, tomorrow we'll tell the park rangers that she was here and maybe they'll do something about it. And so feeling pretty confident that this woman's not going to come back, they both go back into the tent, they zip it shut, they get in their sleeping bags, and they're about to go to sleep when they hear someone running towards their campsite. And they know it's this woman. They immediately unzip the tent and they look out, and now the woman's not digging anymore. She's rummaging through some of their stuff that's outside of their tent. And the way she's doing it, they described as monkey-like. She'd pick something up, look at it, and throw it over her head. She'd pick the next thing up, throw it over her head, back and forth, just throwing things behind her. And so the boy gets out and he shines a light on her and goes, "You need to leave." And she doesn't react. She just keeps flipping through all their stuff until he gets pretty forceful and says, "You need to leave right now." And at that point, she kind of stops and looks at him like, "Huh, what are you doing here?" And then she gets up, turns around, and walks away. Now the couple really doesn't know what to do because she's clearly willing to come back after being confronted. But they stayed outside their tent for about 15 more minutes, shining their light and making lots of noise and treating her like she's an animal. And they're just trying to scare her away from the campsite. And after a little bit of time, they thought, okay, there's no way she comes back now because, we were pretty aggressive with her this time and she seemed to really get it. They both do go back in the tent, and as soon as they zip it shut, they hear her come running straight back to the site, like she was literally waiting in the wings for when they went back in the tent. And this time she runs back to the hole in the ground and she's just feverishly digging into the ground as fast as she can. And this time they come out of their tent and they're mad and they are screaming at this woman to get the F out of here. What are you doing? And this seems to kind of frighten the woman, who gets up and she looks at them like, "Why are you yelling at me?" And she runs away, and it looked almost animalistic the way she was running away, like she was feral. The boy and the girl are totally shaken up at this point. It's about 1:30 in the morning and this woman just keeps coming back to their site and they don't know what to do about it. So they turn on some lanterns and they turn on their flashlights and they decide, we're just going to stay outside until the morning. That way we know she doesn't come back and doesn't steal anything from us. But by about 3:30 in the morning, they've been outside for 2 hours. They're getting cold. They're super tired. The woman's nowhere to be found. And so they finally say, "You want to go back in and get some sleep? I think this time she's really gone." They get back in their sleeping bags and they go to sleep. They don't hear her again. The next morning when they get up and they unzip their tent, they look outside and all of their stuff has been thrown all over the campsite. And the hole in the ground that the woman had dug that was previously about 4 or 6 inches deep is now well over a foot deep. And they realize this woman must have been lurking in the shadows in the woods, watching them from 1:30 to 3:30 in the morning. That whole time they were out there kind of warding her off. She was just waiting, just watching them the whole time in the shadows. And as soon as they went into their tent, she must have given it a little bit of time, but then she ran right back over and she ransacked their site. But the strangest thing was, after they looked through all of the stuff she had chucked around, nothing was missing, and there was some pretty expensive stuff that was laying out that she could have taken but didn't. After they picked up their site, they went to the park ranger and they told them about what had happened, but the ranger has no idea what to make of it. He's never heard of such a thing. And so the couple just leaves that day because they're not about to spend another night here. And to this day, they have no idea why this woman was running onto their site and digging into the ground and rummaging through their stuff. It was like she was just a wild animal. In the early 2000s, a teenager named Eben and his father would regularly go hunting in the Georgia backcountry. When Eben turned 14, his father befriended a very wealthy landowner in Georgia who offered them access to one of his best private hunting areas. And just a couple of days later, on October 5th, Eben and his father would take him up on the offer. They woke up super early and they drove out to the edge of this property that was actually fenced in. And they went to a main gate where they had the combo that this guy had given them. They punched in the combo, opened up the gate, drove in, shut the gate, locked it, and then continued down the access road. They followed this road for about 2 miles where it came to a stop right outside of this huge forest. They parked their truck, they got out, they put on their gear, and in the pre-morning darkness began hiking into the woods. Even though they were there primarily to hunt, Eben and his father secretly enjoyed just hiking around the woods and camping out, and any chance they got to extend their hunting trips, they would, even if the hunting wasn't good. And so since they spent a ton of time in the woods together, they noticed almost immediately when they walked into this particular forest that something was off. There's no birds, there's no animals. Silence. It's just totally silent. The only sounds they heard that were not them was a single plane that passed overhead. Although they found this very odd, they figured, you know what, this is private property, not a lot of people are out here. I'm sure as soon as we showed up, the animals were aware of us and they've scattered. They finally make it out to the hunting stand that the owner had told them about. They get all settled in, they're getting ready to see some animals. And all day long, they don't see a single animal. They don't hear a single animal. In fact, again, it is just completely silent. Frustrated, they began packing up their stuff, making their way down off the stand, and they started looking for a place to make camp for the night. And Eben's father suggested, well, hey, there's obviously nothing over here. It's been quiet all day. Why don't we walk deeper into the woods a little ways, set up camp there, so tomorrow we have a better chance of seeing some animals. So they hiked for about an hour farther away from where they parked their truck, and they reached this clearing, which is perfect for setting up their camp. And so they set up their tent, and Eben's father says, hey, we still got some daylight. Do you want to go try our luck and see if we can see some animals out here now? Eben's like, yeah, why not? So they hike a little ways away from their campsite, and they set up their blind, and once again, they don't see any animals. It's totally quiet. And so they turn around and they start heading back. As soon as they could see their campsite, which really was just their tent, they noticed that their tent was now collapsed. And Eben's father turns to him and says, oh, it must have been the wind. And Eben says, no, it couldn't have been the wind, because all day today we have been commenting on how quiet it is and how the fact that there's no weather, no wind, no anything is heightening the fact that it's completely silent. So it could not have been wind. So Eben's father is like, well, when you set the tent up, did you not put the posts into the eyelets? Did you not build it correctly? And Eben's like, no, I've made that tent like 1,000 times. I know it was set up correctly. They walk into their campsite and they look down at their tent, and they're really confused at what they see. The 2 rods that go in an X over the top of the tent that thread through nylon loops and then anchor at 4 different points on the base of the tent, well, they had been removed from the 4 corners. And if you know how a tent works, it works on tension. And once you have a rod anchored in 2 points, it doesn't just pop out. It's anchored at 2 sides. It's actually difficult to remove each anchor. Once one is out, the other comes out easily. But basically, the rod would need to break in order for it to come out of those anchor points, or someone would have to come over and remove it. And they didn't remove them, and none of the rods were broken. Which leaves them with either they failed to set up their tent, even though they had distinct and clear memories of setting it up and double checking it was set up because they put gear inside of it, or someone came over to their campsite while they were gone and undid the 4 corners. They decide, you know what, it can't be some stranger coming over here because we're the only ones with the gate combo. This is private property and no one could have been here. And why would they do that if they came to our campsite? Why would they randomly collapse our tent and then vanish? So it had to be us. We must have not made the tent. And while they didn't really believe that they had not made their tent, they convinced themselves that that's what happened because the alternative was just too bizarre and frankly terrifying to consider. So they build their tent and they make a little fire and they stay up for a little while chatting before being tired and saying, okay, let's just go to bed. They extinguish the fire, they get in the tent, and they both fall asleep. A couple hours later, Eben wakes up suddenly and he's not sure if he's dreaming or not, but he thinks he hears someone laughing a couple 100 meters behind their tent off in the woods. Eben instinctively turns to make sure his dad is still in the tent with him, and he is. And then Eben starts listening really intently to what's happening outside. and all he can hear is silence, like it's been since they got in the woods. He doesn't hear any more laughter, and so he says, okay, I must have just been dreaming, and there wasn't any laughter out there, and eventually Eben goes back to sleep. A little while later, Eben wakes up suddenly again, except this time his dad is already awake and looking around anxiously. And Eben sits up and goes, what's going on? And his dad goes, shh, and he goes, can you hear that? And Eben listens, and to his horror, he hears laughing. He wasn't dreaming before. Eben also realizes the laughter is not coming from the same area he heard it. It's now coming from the opposite direction, and it's a lot closer to them. Eben very quietly and carefully explains to his dad that he actually heard this laughter a couple hours earlier, and Eben's father turns to Eben and says, before we came out here, I asked the owner, should we expect any other hunters or campers or anybody nearby? And the owner said, this is private property and it's fenced in. There is no one there but you guys. After this revelation, they both turn their attention back to just listening because they're hoping this is just going to stop and whatever this is just going to leave. But it doesn't leave. They hear footsteps running towards them from way off in the forest, and it's so quiet, it's really easy to hear these footsteps. And whatever this is charging towards them. And then it comes to a complete stop right at the edge of their clearing. At this point, Eben is now grabbing onto his father. Eben's father is holding onto his rifle, and he's getting ready to open the tent to confront whatever is out there. And right before he grabs the zipper, this person, whatever it is, starts laughing again, and it's practically right on top of them. It's so loud. They can hear it clear as day right there, right outside their tent. And Eben's father takes a deep breath. He grabs the zipper, and as soon as he begins moving it, the sound the zipper made causes the laughter to stop. They don't hear footsteps, so they know probably something's still out there. But the laughter stops like it's recognized that they're making noise. They're right there. There they are. They're in the tent. Eben's father freezes with his hand on the zipper, and he's debating whether he should go outside or not. And before he can even make that decision, whatever this thing is turns around and runs back into the woods, and it's just gone. And for several minutes, they just sit like that in total silence, praying that whatever this is gone for good. And after several minutes, when they don't hear anything, there's no more laughing, there's no more running, Eben's father re-zips up the tent, puts his hand back down, and they're both left just sitting there thinking, what the heck just happened? Eben and his father would stay up all night, and they would barely speak, because whatever this thing was had heard them when they moved the zipper. And so they were really afraid of making any sound, even little sounds, because it's so quiet, sound travels really far, and they don't know who or what is out there. And so in silence, holding their guns, they're just waiting for the sun to come up. And as soon as it did, they were up and out of there, literally running out of the forest, checking over their shoulder the whole time, all the way back to their truck. And so to this day, they have no idea who or what the heck was running around out there. And they told the owner of the property about it. And the owner just said, it's not possible. We have a totally gated in private piece of property, and there are cameras watching the only entrance. And you are the only ones that went in or out over that time period. And prior to that, we monitor this property. Nobody else was in there. In 2016, a 25-year-old Wall Street banker named Matt was camping near Mount Rainier in Washington state. His job was so hectic that in the rare times he got a chance to, he would disappear into the wilderness for a few days to clear his head. Despite living in one of the biggest cities in the world, Matt was actually a very competent outdoorsman, and so for this trip, he decided he would stay way off any trail, deep in the backcountry in random locations. On the first night, he found a nice clearing in the trees, and so he set up his campsite there. He ate some food over his fire, he pitched his tent, climbed inside, and within a few minutes, he was fast asleep. Several hours later, Matt woke up to some strange sounds coming from outside of his tent. It sounded like a couple of animals or maybe one animal moving around right outside. And so after a while of just hearing this constant sound, he rolled over and he barely unzipped his tent flap just to look out and see if he could see whatever animal it was. And what he saw shocked him. There was a man sitting in front of his fire pit. There was no fire in his fire pit. And the guy was just sitting there with his hands on his knees, looking straight down. And periodically he would just kick his feet in the ashes of the fire pit. And Matt didn't even know what to do, so he's just looking at him through this little tiny gap in his tent. And this man all of a sudden looks up directly at Matt and makes eye contact with him. And the guy's eyes go wide and he stands up, turns around, and runs away from Matt's campsite. Matt has no idea how to react to this. And so he just quickly unzips his tent, jumps outside, and shines his light into the forest looking for this guy. He's thinking to himself, Who is this guy? I am in the middle of nowhere in the backcountry of Washington State. How long was he sitting outside there for? What does he want? And so as Matt is trying to make sense of this totally weird thing, he's thinking, okay, I'm going to look out and I'm going to see his flashlight somewhere, or I'm going to see his campsite. You know, maybe he's set up nearby, and he's looking around into the total darkness. He's looking through all the trees. Any light source anywhere out there he would see. And there's not one. There's no fire. There's no flashlight. There is nothing. And so eventually Matt goes back inside of his tent, he zips it up, and he's just left kind of dumbfounded. He can't understand how some person was just sitting outside of his tent for no apparent reason and then vanished into the forest without even turning on a flashlight. And so after a very restless night, finally the sun came up again and Matt was very relieved. He stepped outside, and after a little bit of time now from this strange incident, Matt started to tell himself that all that was is some guy happened to set up his campsite nearby. It is possible, albeit rare because we're in the backcountry, and maybe he was just intoxicated and he wandered over here, and you know, stranger things have happened, so that's probably all it was. And so Matt felt like there was nothing to worry about. He packed up his campsite and he began hiking into the forest. Matt didn't have a planned route. Instead, he had a map and a compass, and he began just kind of wandering in the forest, kind of exploring wherever he wanted to go. And over the next 2 days, he covered at least 10, maybe 15 miles in kind of random zigzag directions. He found a nice clearing and he set up another campsite. That night, he set up a fire and he was eating some food near his fire. And then as he's sitting there, he hears rustling coming from behind him. And he's pretty sure it's an animal, so he turns around and he doesn't see anything. And he goes back to eating his food. And then a little while later, he hears some more rustling behind him. And this time, he can't really just write it off. Clearly, there is something behind him that's moving around. And so he stood up, turned around, and remained motionless and just listened, expecting to see maybe a deer come out of the woods. But instead, he hears a man's voice come out of the darkness that says,
"Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?"
And Matt's heart starts racing. He knows that even though he can't see him, it has to be the same guy he saw 2 days ago. Because they are in the middle of nowhere. He hasn't seen any other hikers or campers or anyone. And clearly this guy has the ability to sneak up on him. And so he's thinking, what does this guy want? I just spent the past 2 days hiking in random directions for 15 miles, and he must have followed me. And so Matt, not knowing what else to do, just says, I don't know where Bell's Canyon is. And then there's silence. And Matt, one part of him is thinking, I hope this guy does not come into the light. I hope he just goes away. The other part of him is thinking, well, you know, maybe this is a different person that is lost and they're looking for this place called Bell's Canyon, and they'll come into the light. It'll be a big relief. I'll send them on their merry way and everything will be fine. But as Matt is having this wishful thinking, the voice from the shadows does not come any closer, but instead asks the same question, a bit more forcefully this time.
"Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?"
This time, Matt did not respond. Now he was scared. This is not some friendly hiker looking for directions. There's something wrong. And so Matt, knowing he's all alone out here, he knew he had to do something to try to take control of this situation. And so he took a deep breath, he reached down and grabbed his flashlight, and in one swift motion, he lifted his light up and shined it in the direction of this guy's voice. And what he saw was this guy from 2 days ago looking out from behind a tree right in Matt's direction. He was hiding from him. And when the light hit him, the man barked at Matt to aim it away. And Matt kind of instinctively lowered his light, but now he was too scared to raise it again, and now he knows it's the same guy. This guy has been following me for 2 days. And so for several minutes, Matt just stood there absolutely terrified, and this guy, he just stayed out there. Matt didn't hear him move. It was just a complete standstill. And then the silence was broken yet again by this voice, except somehow he had moved even closer to Matt. And when he came through asking the same question,
"Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?"
his voice was so close to Matt that Matt got scared and raised his light up, and the man was standing just a few feet away from him. And this time, the man's eyes got wide like they did the first time they saw Matt, and he turned around and he ran into the forest again. Matt, not knowing any better, just began running after him, but he only ran for about 30 seconds before he realized the terrain out here is so rough. He's gonna fall, get hurt, he's gonna get lost, and this guy's already long gone. He somehow managed to run immediately so far away, and so Matt just goes back to his campsite, and he's thinking to himself, what do I do? I have no cell phone service. I'm at least 3 days away from my car, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. No one even knows where I am because I didn't chart a course. I didn't tell anyone where I was gonna be. And so Matt just grabbed his knife and stood in the middle of the campsite, and for hours and hours, he just kept looking around, expecting this guy to just show up again or start speaking to him from somewhere out in the darkness. It was absolutely horrifying. Finally, by about 3 in the morning, Matt was so tired that he had to go to sleep. He hadn't heard this guy again, he didn't see him again, and he figured, I need a little bit of sleep because tomorrow he's gonna pack up his campsite and begin this epic journey back to his car. And so he climbed in his tent and he had a very restless next couple of hours. And when the sun came up, Matt jumped out of his tent, packed up his stuff, and began practically running in the direction of his car. All day as he was hiking, Matt kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see this guy, because clearly he had followed him for multiple days, over 15 miles, and so the likelihood that he's still following him was really high. And so all day, Matt just felt like he was being watched, he was totally terrified, and then the sun started to go down, and Matt knew he would have to camp out again. And so he found a clearing in the trees, he set up his campsite, and he was so tired from running basically all day and being so mentally exhausted from this experience that he just got in his tent and fell asleep very quickly. But several hours later, he woke up to the sound of somebody walking around his tent, and he knew it had to be this guy. He's still in the middle of nowhere. He's not even close to the parking lot yet. And so this guy is still following him. And so Matt sat up in his tent, he clutched his knife, and for hours and hours and hours, all night, this guy just walked around his campsite. And then around 4 or 5 in the morning, he scampered off. When the sun finally came up, Matt leapt out of his tent, packed up his stuff, and literally just began running in the direction of his car, hoping that maybe he could get there before needing to camp out one more night. And so all day as he moved, he's looking over his shoulder, knowing this guy is following him. At this point, it's not even a question. He's somewhere in the forest, but he could never see him. And unfortunately, as the sun was setting, he knew he was not going to be able to make it to his car. He was just too far away. And so at some point when it got too dark to keep moving, he had to find a clearing and set up his tent again. And so Matt climbed inside of his tent, he zipped it up behind him, he grabbed his knife, and he sat there expecting to hear this guy come walking around. But after several hours, he didn't hear him. And Matt started to wonder, maybe this guy has left me alone, finally. Maybe he's not following me anymore. And so Matt, who was totally exhausted, laid down to go to sleep. And then as he's laying there from somewhere out in the woods,
Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?
Matt immediately sat up. His heart began racing so fast that he actually was concerned he might have a heart attack. And he didn't know what to do, he didn't know what to say, so he just sat there holding his knife. And then this guy began running past his campsite, making animal sounds, and he would stop periodically and moan and grunt, and he'd kick up leaves, and then he'd run past his campsite again, over and over and over again, until the sun finally came up and this guy scampered off back into the woods. Matt didn't waste any time. He leapt out of his tent, packed his stuff up, and ran all the way back to his car. When he finally got inside of his car, shut the door, and locked it, he cried tears of joy. He was so unbelievably relieved. And he peeled out of the parking lot, he got to a nearby hotel, he finally got cell phone reception, and he considered calling the police about this guy, but he thought, what am I gonna tell them? He didn't commit a crime, he was just terrifying. And so he decided not to call the police. He finally flew back to New York, and he just had to accept that there was some strange guy out in the wilderness of Washington state who was able to hunt him over 3 days and 30 miles in rugged terrain without the use of a flashlight, without any gear, and all he ever said to Matt was,
Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?
Wait, don't go anywhere. We actually have a bonus story for you. This final story has quickly become one of the classics on this channel. It's a story about a forest in Connecticut that is actually illegal to enter, basically because of maybe paranormal activity out there, we don't know, but it is actually illegal to go into this forest. There's a whole crazy story around it. I actually told the story on a live stream recently about Dudleytown, and so we went ahead and took that footage, we edited it, made it really pretty, and now you get to watch it in case you didn't see it live. Enjoy. In the summer of 1906, there was this couple, Dr. William Clark and his wife Harriet, and they were up in northwestern Connecticut, and they're driving along this winding country road in a place called Litchfield County. And as they're driving along, it's so scenic and beautiful with rolling hills and green everywhere. And what they were doing is they were looking for a location in this area that could serve as a location for their second home. So Dr. Clark was an oncologist, and they lived back in New York City, where he and his wife lived kind of a fabulous life. You know, he was super successful. He was not only an oncologist, he was a big-time professor as well. And so they lived this amazing life in New York. But, you know, their lives were really hectic. You know, New York City is a hectic place. Add in the fact that they were very social people, always going out and going to functions and this and that. And so they had some extra money, and they wanted to, you know, buy or build a second home that would kind of serve as their retreat away from the city. And after, I guess, looking all around the country, they found Litchfield County was kind of like the opposite of New York City. I mean, very few people were living there at the time. And again, it's this beautiful scenic place. And so it just seemed kind of like the perfect spot. So again, Dr. Clark and Harriet, they're just driving along, beautiful day. And they eventually, in Litchfield County, they eventually reach this beautiful red wood-covered bridge. And they go over it, and when they get to the other side, their field of view opened up because there weren't as many trees right on the other side of this bridge. And they suddenly had this view up and to the right, maybe, you know, half a mile away or something, of this weirdly shaded forest. Now, you got to remember that basically everywhere they're looking, there's trees everywhere. I mean, it's very densely forested everywhere, but there was just this one kind of rise, like a pretty big hill, a prominent hill that was really dark, like totally shaded. And it was because there's two mountains or two hills on either side of it, almost creating like a valley. And so it just looked like, wow, that's a very shaded forest. And as you'll see, it's actually called the Dark Entry Forest, in part because of how shaded it is. And so they've just come out of this bridge, and they're seeing this area up on this hill. There's no buildings, nothing. It's just trees. And there was just something immediately about it that really stood out to Dr. Clark and his wife. And they noticed that the road they were on, there appeared to be like an access road that kind of splintered off the road they were on that appeared to go up into that forest, the Dark Entry Forest. And so they look at each other and they're like, hey, let's go up there. Maybe that's the place where we can find our spot for our second home. And so Dr. Clark pulls off the main road, goes on the access road, and he begins making his way up towards this kind of darkened forest area. And really quickly, the road itself was very overgrown. You know, at first it seemed like it was relatively well maintained, but the farther up they went towards this dark forest, the rougher it got, to the point where Dr. Clark couldn't even drive on it. There was too many potholes and everything. So they end up pulling the car over and parking. And at this point, they're actually in a bit of a clearing, and they can actually see up ahead of them where they parked. It looks almost like an entry point to the forest. The tree line is right in front of them, and there's kind of like a gap in the trees where this rugged road kind of continues into the forest, and they continue walking on foot towards the entry of this forest. Again, it's beautiful, scenic, very sunny, beautiful day. They're super excited, and they walk into the shade of the forest. And right away, it's like all the sunlight basically vanishes, but not in a spooky way, kind of like they lowered the brightness slightly, and it's very quiet. And, you know, the canopy in Dark Entry Forest is known for being really, really thick. And so not much light was pushing through, but it created almost like, it was like they were walking into a bubble. You know, it's just pure, unadulterated silence and peace. And as they're walking on this road, which quickly becomes mostly like a little path, it doesn't even look like a road at some point. It's just kind of like grass that's been pushed down. Clearly, not many people or anything is coming into this forest, at least not from this direction. And as they're walking along, they're looking around and they're like, this place is so beautiful. I mean, it was already beautiful, but this is especially beautiful. Like, they walked maybe a couple hundred feet into the forest, and off to their right is this apple orchard, untouched. No one's taking these apples. It's just like a wild apple orchard, and there's deer that are just eating the apples off the tree. And they're looking over at Dr. Clark and his wife, and they're completely unafraid. They don't see people, so this is not terrifying for them. Deer just eating their apples. And then, you know, on the other side of the road, there's these huge, you know, fields full of flowers that are, again, trees are everywhere, but there's all these flowers at the bases of the trees, you know, lilies and roses and yellow bitter tansies, or I think that's what they're called. So all these beautiful flowers. And then at some point, as they walked a little bit farther into this Dark Entry Forest, the sunlight that was poking through, it was hitting the ground in such a way that it was actually sparkling, because This forest was actually on a hillside, and there was this mineral called mica. If you're familiar, it's like this little translucent, it almost looks like kind of clouded glass. That's actually a mineral that comes from the ground. And when the sunlight hits it, it kind of looks like it sparkles. And so they're looking around at these wild animals that are unafraid of them, and flowers, and there's, babbling brooks and streams. I mean, it's like out of a Disney movie. This is like a perfect place. And so by the time the couple came out of Dark Entry Forest, this is only, like they walked around for maybe an hour or so. By the time they were coming out, they were completely sold that was going to be where they went ahead and bought their land to build a second home. And so they go back to New York City and they put in the paperwork to buy the land, and they buy 1,000 acres in this forest, which it's ridiculous to imagine just casually buying 1,000 acres anywhere. But they did. They bought their 1,000 acres. And as soon as they had it, as soon as it was finalized, Dr. Clark began calling around to all these builders, local builders in Connecticut, that could help him build his home. And he had no intention of building some humongous home. They bought a huge amount of land, but they only wanted to build a small cabin. But despite the job being relatively simple, and despite Dr. Clark offering quite a bit of money to anybody who was willing to go out there and build this for him, none of the builders would do it. They never really gave a straight answer to Dr. Clark about why they would not go into Dark Entry Forest, but universally, no one would do it. And so, Dr. Clark, he definitely was discouraged by that, but he just kind of chalked it up to, okay, so obviously it's kind of an isolated place. It's relatively hard to get into Dark Entry Forest, and where they had bought this land, it was pretty far into the forest. And so he just decided, okay, it just might not be worth it for them. It's logistically kind of a nightmare. They don't want to do it. And so Dr. Clark is undeterred, and he decides he will just build the house himself. Dr. Clark, he grew up on a farm in New Jersey. He was a very handy guy. He had built buildings before, so this was something he could do. And so over the next several months, every weekend, Dr. Clark would make his way on his own to Dark Entry Forest, and it also was full of owls that were hooting all the time. So there's like this audio side of being in this forest, which is really intense. Like there's owls hooting constantly. And actually, Dr. Clark and Harriet thought it was really cute that these owls, it seemed like they were almost personally greeting them as they came into the forest. And so Dr. Clark, every weekend for several months, he would go into Dark Entry Forest and be greeted by the owls, and he would go to the land where the 1,000-acre land. And actually, he had identified this one kind of flat spot in the 1,000 acres that was good for building a home. And so the first thing he did over these several weekends he was out there is he just cut down this massive swath of hemlock trees, just kind of clearing out that flat area. And then he chopped up the trees he cut down into lumber, and he used that to build a rustic, simple 2-story cabin. And then after this cabin was built, kind of up on this hill, there happened to be another hill not too far away from the cabin where there was a freshwater spring right at the top. And so, Dr. Clark, he went up and laid piping from the freshwater spring down to his cabin. So they had fresh water in the cabin. And then down the hill from where the cabin was constructed was a small brook. And Dr. Clark, he found himself always going down and just staring into this beautiful brook because there were all these trout, because nobody fished out here. This is like an abandoned place, basically. There's all these trout just swimming around unencumbered, just leaping out of the water. If they even do that, I don't know if trout do that. I think they do. And so he ended up actually building a swimming pool right next to the brook, specifically so he could sit in the swimming pool and watch the trout. And so by Thanksgiving of that year, so 1906, by Thanksgiving, the property was done. The cabin had been built, everything was done. And so that holiday season, Dr. Clark and Harriet and their whole family would come out and they would spend the holidays, sitting in their pool, watching the trout and just having a wonderful time. And really for many years, every summer and every major holiday, the Clark family would come out to their beautiful Dark Entry cabin and they would stay there. And it was really perfect. That is until 1918. In 1918, in the summer, Dr. Clark and Harriet were at their cabin and they were having a nice time when Dr. Clark got word that he was actually being called back to New York City for an emergency. Remember, he's an oncologist, so these things happen, and he was called back. And for whatever reason, Harriet, who normally likely would have joined him and just gone back to New York with him, she decided to stay. I mean, they've been coming here for years by this point, so she probably felt somewhat comfortable, Although admittedly, she was very unhappy about this. She didn't want to be there alone, but again, she decides to stay. But she tells Dr. Clark, because she didn't know how long he would actually be in New York, and he didn't really know either. But she said, "You got to promise me you'll be back here as soon as you possibly can." And Dr. Clark would tell her that, "I'll do my best. I should be back here in maybe, a couple of days from now. And I promise you I will come home as soon as I possibly can." And so Dr. Clark packs up his things, and he and his wife, they leave their cabin. They, walk their way down the trail, listening to the owls and looking at the mica sparkling on the ground. And they leave the forest and they make their way to a nearby train station, which actually was not that far away from the entry to the forest. And Harriet dropped off her husband, and she watched, as he, boarded, and it began taking off, and he disappeared to go to New York. And Dr. Clark, as he's vanishing, traveling on this train, he's thinking to himself that, okay, I'll be in New York just for a couple of days. I'll be home. I'll be back in no time. Little did he know, over the course of time he was going to be in New York, his wife would endure something that is just truly horrifying. So, before I explain to you what happened after Dr. Clark left, you need to understand some history about this forest. History that Dr. Clark and Harriet did not look into before deciding to purchase these 1,000 acres. Because had they done the research into this area, they likely would not have bought the land. So there actually used to be a town that was settled in the Dark Entry Forest. It was called Dudleytown. And it was settled in the 1740s. And at first it was just a couple of families just getting by, but pretty quickly it grew to about 30 families and several structures and houses and the whole nine yards. Like, it's a small community inside of this beautiful forest, and things were great. For a small town in the 1700s, things were stable. But starting at the end of the 1700s, like in the 1790s up till about the 1800s, things started to go really, really badly in Dudleytown. And in fact, because of how badly it went, it earned this, the conclusion was that Dudleytown had to be cursed. And that lore had stuck around, which is actually why those builders refused to do the work for Dr. Clark, because they believed it was a cursed place. So this is what led to it being believed to be cursed. And I'll tell you, it's pretty creepy. So it started with the Carter family. So the Carter family was a big family inside of Dudleytown, and it was in 1790, 1792, there was this cholera epidemic that broke out in this small town, and 6 members of the Carter family died really suddenly from cholera. And the remaining members of the Carter family, which was significant, I think there was a dozen people still left, might have been a few less than that, but a pretty good chunk of people, they were so grief-stricken from the loss that they decided to just literally abandon their houses in Dudleytown and go back to New York City, where they happened to be from as well, same as Dr. Clark. But as soon as they got to New York, they were massacred by natives that lived in the area. And the only people that survived this massacre were 3 children, and the 3 children were kidnapped and never seen again. And so that was the start of bad things happening to people in Dudleytown. The next thing that happened is there was a guy named Hollister. We don't know his last name, but he either fell off a roof or he was pushed. We don't really know, but either way, he died. But he died on or near another person's home whose name was Tanner. Okay, so Hollister dies, and he dies on or near Tanner's home. And after Hollister died, which again, it was shrouded in mystery, Tanner, the owner of the home where this guy died, he began talking obsessively, and it's documented, obsessively about strange creatures lurking around the tree line inside of Dark Entry Forest, right around Dudleytown, every night. That's all he saw. So guy dies, and all of a sudden Tanner is noticing all these strange creatures. And he's telling everybody in town that there's something going on here. Nobody believed him. And so slowly, Tanner, every night, he would see whatever he was seeing, and it drove him insane, completely insane, to the point where he couldn't even function, and his daughter had to take care of him until he passed away. And as Tanner was losing his mind, his next door neighbor, whose name was Abel, began to talk as well about these creatures that were coming to the edge of the tree line surrounding Dudleytown most nights. And just like Tanner, Abel as well slowly lost his mind over these creatures because nobody believed him. And then all the way up until like just past the 1800s, so many people just randomly died in Dudleytown, some from disease for sure, but others, they'd just be found dead. And then many people as well began citing these strange creatures that were lurking all around. By 1900, the only family that was still alive in Dudleytown was this family called the Brophies. And it was a fairly big family. And the mother, she suddenly died of cholera. The two sons, they were accused of theft in another town and then fled and vanished. And so literally it's down to John Brophy, the actual last person who's living in Dudleytown. And one night, he didn't know why, apparently he didn't know why, but his cabin burned to the ground. And after his cabin, or while his cabin was burning, people were called out. They saw the smoke. They came out to put out this fire. And the last anyone saw of John, who's lost his whole family, he's lost everything, is he just turned and walked deeper into the forest and was never seen again. And no one could find him. That was it. And that was the last person who lived in Dudleytown. And that marked the moment that Dudleytown went from, still being occupied to being a literal ghost town. And you can actually look up the newspaper article that documented the moment when Dudleytown became a ghost town. No one lives there. A few years later is when Dr. Clark and Harriet were taking their stroll through Litchfield County and up into Dark Entry Forest and saying, wow, this is the place for us. And they saw the ruins of Dudleytown. They walked past the crumbling foundations of these old homes, and there was all these remnants of this town that was still there, but much the way they viewed the owls as being kind of charming, they also viewed this rundown old town that was gone as kind of cute, and it made them want to stay there more. So they were aware of the town, but didn't do the research. Apparently Dudleytown was cursed, and that is where they bought their land. So, fast forward to 1918. So Dr. Clark, he's left for this emergency trip to New York, and it would turn out he was only needed in New York for 36 hours. It was, as short as he could have expected it to be. So less than 2 days later, keeping his word to his wife, he's back on a train, and he's heading back to that stop where Harriet had dropped him off near the Dark Entry Forest. And although this was rare that, Dr. Clark would leave his wife in the cabin, he expected her to be waiting for him at the train station. They didn't have an exact time that he was going to be there because it wasn't not entirely planned, but he had said, I'll be here in like 1 or 2 days max. And so he just kind of expected his wife to check the schedule and be at the train platform. But as he's pulling into the station, he sees his wife is not there. Now, this was not some huge cause for concern, but it was enough of a red flag that as, he's pulling into the station, Dr. Clark is thinking something feels off. And so he ends up going from the train station, and he actually walked the rest of the way. He didn't take a car or anything. He walked to that access road and made his way up to the entry of Dark Entry Forest. And as soon as he walked into the forest, so daylight out here, he steps into the canopy and it's dark again. And remember, it used to feel so welcoming and wonderful going into that forest. It was so peaceful, but now it has a different feel. He steps into the forest and suddenly it feels threatening. It feels ominous. And the owls that are hooting the whole time he steps in, it didn't feel like they were greeting him. It felt like they were telling him to leave. But he had to find his wife, and he's thinking she's up at the cabin. That's where we need to go. And so he begins kind of jogging, fast walking. He's getting a little nervous through the forest. And as he's moving through, the sounds of these owls are getting louder and louder and louder and more threatening until finally when he gets to the clearing, when he can actually look up and see where he built his cabin up on this hill, it's like a cacophony of noise. It's just constant hooting, almost like it doesn't even sound like hooting. It's just a loud sound that's constant. And so Dr. Clark is starting to panic, but he gets even more panicked when he looks up at the cabin. He doesn't see his wife, but he sees the front door to this cabin is slightly ajar. And so Dr. Clark, he runs the rest of the way up the hill, owls hooting the whole time. He gets to the door and he's terrified. He knows there's something wrong here, but he gets the courage. He opens up the front door, and the second he steps into this home, which he has loved and spent years and years in with his family, he steps in and everything is different. Instead of it being peaceful, he now feels this almost high-pitched sound, like inside of his head for a second, and he's confused. And then he hears what sounds like maniacal laughter coming from the second floor. He doesn't see anybody on the first floor. He thinks it's his wife, and so he charges upstairs. He gets to the landing, and he sees the door to his bedroom, where he would expect his wife to be, is slightly open. And he can hear this laughter coming from inside of this room, this maniacal, crazy, loud, high-pitched laughter. And he's totally panicked. He goes to the door, and he opens it up, And there, in the back corner of the bedroom, is his wife. And she's in the fetal position, and her mouth has been opened as wide as it can go. And the laughter that he's hearing is coming out of her body, but her jaw isn't moving. Her chest is heaving, and this maniacal laughter is just coming out of her as she stares him dead in the eyes. And so Dr. Clark, he was so terrified at what he was seeing and all the hooting and all this craziness going on that he just turned and ran away. We don't know what happened to Harriet Clark over those 36 hours that her husband was gone, but something happened to her. And when she was taken away from this cabin, the only thing she would say is the strange creatures kept coming back. I kept seeing strange creatures. Same thing that all the people in Dudleytown had said that caused them to flee the town. And so we don't know exactly what became of Harriet. There is one account that says she was forever, she went to a mental hospital and stayed there until she passed. Another account says she went back to New York with Dr. Clark, where she took her life. But either way, the final thing was she claimed to have seen the strange creatures and lost her mind as well. Following the story, Dark Entry Forest really took on this unbelievable legend. I mean, people knew about this story. They knew about the legend of the 1700s and 1800s, but this felt recent. I mean, this was a documented case of this doctor's wife. And so it spawned a lot of people going into Dark Entry Forest to see what's out there. And lots of people who go into that forest before it became illegal reported feeling phantom hands slapping them on the back and feeling really intense pockets of cold air. And actually, the very famous paranormal couple, Ed and Lorraine Warren, in the 1970s, they went out and ran the special series about what happened in the Dark Entry Forest. And they came out and said, absolutely, that forest is demonically possessed. So that's going to do it. If you enjoyed today's collection of strange, dark, and mysterious stories, and you're looking for more content like that, remember, we have a whole slew of podcasts under the Ballen Studios umbrella. All these podcasts are amazing. It's all bingeable content, and it's available right now for free. All you have to do is go to any podcast platform, look up Ballen Studios, and boom, there's all our podcasts to choose from. Okay, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for your support. Until next time, see ya.
Future you. I hope the show went incredibly well. I hope that you got to enjoy being on stage and got to really just be in the moment. I'm very nervous, but I'm very excited. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I grew up in a town called Quincy, Massachusetts. It's just south of Boston, Massachusetts. My mother and my father were both and are still just brilliant people. My father is, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He ran an investigative journalism team at the Boston Globe called Spotlight. My immediate family, the way we communicated was like, we'd send these emails to each other that were like totally unnecessarily long about like really kind of meaningless things. Everybody over communicated. Everyone had to write in beautiful prose and like tell whole full-length stories about the smallest of things. And so I was literally raised effectively by storytellers. I always viewed myself as being kind of like the black sheep of my family because my two sisters, my older and younger sister, like totally excelled in school. And my older sister became a Pulitzer Prize winner twice, actually. And my younger sister is a PhD scientist working out of a Harvard lab. I was like the guy that kind of bombed high school. Not because I was dumb, I just didn't really try. Effectively flunked out my first semester in college because I didn't go to class. But fast forward a bit, after I did wind up graduating college, I got my act together. I joined the Navy and I become a Navy SEAL. And one of the things people don't know about really the military, unless you're in the military, is there is lots and lots of public speaking that goes on all the time. I learned that my strength was definitely like, I can tell stories exceptionally well, and I can remember a lot of details if I have a story in my mind. There wasn't ever a day where I thought to myself, here's the big idea. Generally speaking, social media and, creating content allows people, kind of relative nobodies, to post things on the internet, and if the world likes it, it can elevate that person and create, a brand or, a new YouTube channel. I really missed the mark for a number of years trying to create content that people would like. I mimicked other people's content style on TikTok, which was so cringy. I was like doing dance videos and like comedy sketches.
Nobody was interested. But I knew the one thing that I've always been just fundamentally interested in is strange, dark, and mysterious content. I put together this really crappy TikTok video, crappy in the sense that I formatted it all wrong, like the script didn't really make much sense, but it had the meat and potatoes of this really fascinating story about these hikers that go missing in the 1950s in Russia.
When you finish this video, you're going to Google 2 words. In 1959, 9 very experienced Russian hikers set off on a 16-day expedition into the mountains. 7 days in and some bad weather forced them to make...
And I post this story to TikTok, and I was actually at a water park with my family in Pennsylvania. Because we're going to be in the water park, I couldn't have my phone, it would get soaked, so I left it in the room. We went to the park all day, and I came back to my room and I opened up my phone. The video that I had posted about the missing hikers had like 5 million views. And to give some perspective, I think the most views I ever got on any piece of content ever to that point was like maybe 10 or 20,000 over like a year-long period. I launched into this insane, making content 24/7 to try to replicate the success of that first video. After a few months of doing that, and the TikTok account had really grown quickly, I transitioned to YouTube. I remember I pulled my wife aside, Amanda, and I tried to explain to her, like, hey, so I have this thing going on TikTok, and I'm gonna like do it on YouTube. I don't know what it's gonna be, but I think it's something. But in order for me to do it, I need you to take the kids basically 24/7 and let me only work like 24/7 until this becomes whatever it becomes. And my wife's like, okay, I'll do that for you.
So I wanted to bring you into my dojo where I create all of my content. It's called the Mustard Room. It's pretty high speed, so don't be intimidated. It's my setup, nice and neat. This is where all the magic happens.
I kid you not, I was in that back room in Pennsylvania with the space heater and the rodents in the walls, like churning out content for like 6 months. And I was sleeping in there. I mean, literally, it was my life. She believed in me, and so she let me do it. And it really is what allowed the channel to grow.
John was flagged to me by my buddy Giacomo. So Giacomo's the guy that hit me up. He's like, if anyone can work for this guy, it's you. And I knew nothing of digital. I knew nothing of YouTube, nothing of TikTok. I don't even have social media. I didn't understand what I was looking at when I looked at John's content. But me being a veteran, and I've always worked with veterans in entertainment, I was like, I like what he's doing. I can believe in this guy and what his message is. And I could tell that there was something there. So I was like, all right, let me, have you guys tried to sign him? They're like, yeah, we tried to sign him like 8 months. He won't sign with us. He barely take a call. He's a former Navy SEAL, makes content from his phone. What's a manager to this guy? I go, you guys are just approaching it wrong. I reached out to him. I got his email, subject line, I'm a combat vet, love your material. I work with Mr. Beast. I also have some experience in the traditional space, and I love your content, huge fan. Hit me up if you ever have any questions. Not here to sign you, not here to make any money, just one vet to another. About a week later, he hit me up. He's like, dude, I was running through some emails, deleting everything, and I saw your email, and I'm down to talk. It was funny because these guys who like rep Mr. Beast couldn't sign this guy, and so for me, I was like, if I'm gonna work with anybody, this is the guy.
Not everyone gets to find their unicorn, but I did in Nick, and I think Nick found his unicorn in me, and that's what it has allowed us to grow, where I know what I'm responsible for, and it's the thing I know I'm good at, storytelling, and Nick does everything else.
You can't just insert yourself in someone's life. You have to just show, that you're there for the right reason. My way was like, all right, I lived in Austin, he was in PA, but I put a reminder on my calendar every Sunday. Ping John, say what up, and just ask him if he needs any help with anything, and just start to like kind of build a relationship organically.
I mean, Nick really, single-handedly has grown from me, the one-man band, MrBallen, to a full-blown studio. I've been in like the back room of my house in Pennsylvania that had no heat and rodents running in the walls, to now have like a literal studio with all the right equipment and soundproofing.
This is the podcast setup. It's about half of the studio here. And the most important part of the podcast setup is right here. Boom.
Got the headlights, the functioning headlights on the set, very cool. I bring this guy down here, and boom, this is the podcast setup. And if we're doing a live event, you'd see the cool headlights, but I always turn them on no matter what. And over here, we have the YouTube setup, as you can see with the green screen here. This actually took so many coats of paint. This is like not a simple thing to create. It needs to be totally uniform, so sick little green screen, and then the MrBallen director's chair. Sit here, fire up my my laptop, and then I record YouTube episodes right here. And believe it or not, even though I have this whole studio, I still record the YouTube episodes on my phone. And so I literally just put my phone on this little $5 tripod, sit down here, and if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do inside of the strange, dark, and mysterious studio. And so this is it. This is where I spend like all my time. I do my research and writing and scripting over here, and obviously YouTube as well. And this is it. I really don't read from the script. It's not because I'm better than that or something. It's more like the way I work, the way I tell stories is I need to like inhabit the story and really like internalize the details of the story. And so I get the script and I study the script and basically memorize not the words on the page, but the structure of the story. And then once it's in my head, like I've got it. I wanted to make it really clear to anybody that was gonna tune in and watch a piece of content from me. If you wait to the end of the story, it will be worth it. Every week we're putting out multiple stories that are, 7,000 words, which is 30 to 45 minutes long, that are fully researched, and written out. There's an enormous amount of work, and this is how many YouTubers begin. They just kind of do it all themselves, but it's totally not sustainable. I have this mantra that I try to preach to my kids, which is like, do things that scare you, because generally speaking, things that scare you are actually the things you want to do. I'm so impressed with people that literally take the stage and perform in front of a live audience. To me, like stand-up comics are some of the bravest people you'll ever meet. That is a otherworldly level of courage to go up there and face potential ridicule and like bombing. I'll admit that I was still resistant to the idea, even though now I have the material and I have the audience that would listen to it, but I was still just like nervous. I want the people in the audience to be drawn into the stories I'm telling the same way they are at home when they're watching YouTube or listening to a podcast. And it's a privilege to have the opportunity to stand in front of people that want to be there. 1,000+ people who have chosen to be here, that have flown from out of the United States to be here just to listen to me. Like, yes, that's pressure, but it's also a privilege. Wow. Taking it all in. Hello, team. How you doing? Wow. Very strange, dark, and mysterious in here. This is amazing. Whoever designed and did this. Amazing. I don't know what I had in mind, but it was way less cool than this. This is infinitely better than I imagined.
This is my daughter, MrBallen. She loves you. We're here because of you. We flew all the way from North Carolina.
We love your show. You're doing great, and thank you for serving our country.
Excited to be here. Can't wait to see you. For years, I've been watching all of your videos. I got my husband to watch all of them as we go to bed. They have become our bedtime routine, so thank you, MrBallen, for everything that you've done for us.
John's fans are like the strongest, most loyal community I've ever seen. And the fact that he gets to bring that to them in person is just fascinating.
Rare shot of a hatless, in uniform MrBallen.
Yeah.
Very cool. Actually feeling pretty calm.
Oh yeah.
All things considered.
Yep. Wanted to make sure you had a good feel of like when you're on stage, what they're going to see, how you're going to see. I mean, you probably won't see too deep in.
I probably will see virtually no one.
Nobody.
Yeah.
Imagine everyone naked. That's the trick. He's so primed. He's such a professional. And he's been ready for this since he started telling stories. He just now is at a point to really execute it. To look at this, and I'm just like so proud
for like him, my client, but I'm so proud of him as my brother, you know, and this is such a good moment for him to have and his family. Yeah, like I told him, like, dude, I'm gonna cry, dude. This is so cool. And then all the hard work that he's done, hard work that we've done together, gets this moment. He earned it and he deserves it.
I wanted Ballen Studios to be the place where the best storytellers want to go. We know there is huge appetite amongst our incredible fans for hearing these stories in person, but we want to find every possible way to engage with our fans and get these stories out there. And we really believe that live storytelling events are going to be a big part of our offering.
What a privilege, huh?
I want them to leave thinking, my God, that guy can tell a story.
We are going to cover 4, maybe 5 stories. So basically see how it goes, 4 or 5 stories.
This is called The Experiment, and it's new. These are not just cool stories. These are real stories about real people. I knew the one thing that I've always been just fundamentally interested in is strange, dark, and mysterious content. We kind of have a responsibility with this popularity to really, in a big and meaningful way, literally give back to the victims who are actually in the stories we have covered. We decided to start the MrBallen Foundation, which is a charity that honors and supports victims of violent crime as well as their families. And this charity, it's entirely not for profit. I mean, really, their donations that come in are going right out the door to victims and to their families. Ballen Studios is contributing over $1 million just this year. It'll continue to go up every year, which offsets all of the operational costs completely and then some, so that when people are donating to this charity, it's literally 100% goes out the door to the people that need it. I hope you all enjoyed that documentary as much as we did creating it. I will tell you that seriously, up until the last second before I walked on stage, I was so nervous, like so nervous. But as I walked out on stage to our theme song and this amazing audience of all you incredible, strange, dark, and mysterious fans, it was electric. I felt invincible up there, and all the nerves went away. And I just had the most incredible time. I can't thank you enough if you were there, and thank you for tuning in all the way to now, because now it's time for the big announcement that really is a product of how well that first live event went. Because I enjoyed that so much, and because it was so clear the audience did too, I've decided to do a full-blown tour. Starting on September 26th through October 20th of this year, you can find me in 15 different cities across the United States. And this show is going to be amazing. It's going to include never-before-heard stories on any of our channels or mediums, and also some good old-fashioned classics. And there's amazing set design and sound effects, and there's some interactive stuff going on. I mean, it's really an incredible show. We're really building off the success of that first show that was featured in the documentary. And guess what? Tickets for this tour are available right now, like literally right now. All you have to do is go to tour.ballenstudios.com. And in terms of what kind of tickets you can get, they range from general admission to VIP. And if you do the VIP package, you get to meet this guy. All right, pretty good, pretty good. And just for reference, the VIP tickets for that one show we did last year that was in this documentary, those sold out pretty much right away. So if that's the kind of thing that interests you, you really got to go to tour.ballen studios right now and get those VIP tickets because they're going to go. So that's going to do it. I can't wait to see you on this big tour. I'm seriously so excited. So go get your tickets. And seriously, thank you so much for all the support over the years. I wouldn't be able to do any of this without all of you. So thank you so much. And until next time, see ya. Morning hours before sunrise on April 12th, 1990, a 31-year-old man named Nathan Neesmith pushed down on the gas throttle of the fishing boat that he was steering just off the coast of Georgia. And as he did this, he expected the boat to naturally kind of kick into a higher gear and go faster. But as he pushed that throttle down, nothing really happened, and the boat just kind of sputtered along, going about half the speed that he expected it to go. Confused, Nathan stepped away and began making his way out towards the deck, where his younger brother, Billy Joe, who was actually the captain of this fishing boat, was out there taking a nap. And Nathan figured, if there was any issue with the boat, Billy Joe was the guy to talk to. He would know how to fix it. Now, for context, the two brothers were on the first day of a 7-day fishing trip that actually Nathan was not supposed to be a part of. The crew was originally going to be Billy Joe, the captain, and the one who actually rented the boat, along with Billy Joe's nephew, and also 2 other commercial fishermen. But at the last second, those 2 other commercial fishermen had bowed out, and Nathan and a friend had volunteered to go to round out the crew. Now, Nathan and Billy Joe, they came from a fishing family, but it was really only Billy Joe who had pursued the family business. Now, Nathan was perfectly handy out on the water and did know how to fish and knew his way around a fishing boat, but compared to Billy Joe, there was a massive gap in experience. Billy Joe was the fisherman, and Nathan really was not. But Nathan and Billy Joe were very close, and so as soon as Nathan heard Billy Joe was in trouble and needed some more fishermen, Nathan didn't hesitate to say he would do it. Because really, for their entire lives, that was sort of their dynamic. Even though Nathan was the older brother, it was Nathan who looked up to Billy Joe, and any chance he got, he would do anything to help Billy Joe. And Billy Joe really respected that and loved that about Nathan. But now, as Nathan made his way out to the deck to wake his brother up to tell him on the first day of the trip, right as Nathan's taking the wheel, that something's wrong with the boat and I can't fix it. And also, Nathan was enormous, like 250 pounds, well over 6 feet tall. He was huge, this big physical presence, but he really was not mechanically savvy at all. And so again, Nathan is sort of feeling like, sorry, and also maybe even second guessing whether or not it was even a good idea for him to have come along. If he can't even fix a minor issue with the throttle or the engine, what's he doing here? But when Nathan woke up his younger brother and explained the issue, Billy Joe was not upset. He was like, okay, we'll go down below and we'll take a look at the engine and make sure everything is okay. However, when they went down and Billy Joe opened up this hatch to look at the engine, smoke immediately came out, and it was very clear to Billy Joe anyways, that this was not like a minor issue. Something seriously was wrong with the engine. This was a big problem. And so Billy Joe began cussing, he's totally frustrated, and he just told Nathan to, go down below and tell the other 2 to wake up and come help. And so huge Nathan turned around and went down into the bunk room down below, and the second he got down to that level of the fishing boat, he just stopped because there was at least a foot of water in the hallway and in the bunk room when he went inside. And so Nathan screamed at the other 2 fishermen to get up, and so they got up and they're looking down, they're seeing all this water, and so they're starting to panic. And Nathan, he goes back upstairs and he yells to Billy Joe, who's dealing with this engine issue, that in addition to that, it appears the boat is also sinking. And so Billy Joe is like, get buckets, go down there and start bailing out the water. I'm going to call Mayday. And so Billy Joe runs back up to the steering wheel. He grabs the radio, and Nathan and the others can hear him yelling over and over again, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And as that was happening, Nathan and the other 2 fishermen put on their life vests, grabbed buckets, and went down below to begin manually bailing out the water. But the second they got down there, it was very obvious the water, wherever it was leaking into the ship, was coming in way faster than they could potentially bail out. But they kept doing it, getting the water out as fast as they could, trying to stay calm. They can hear Billy getting more and more frantic, yelling Mayday over and over again. And then all the lights inside of the ship began to flicker, and then they went out, and they were cast into total darkness. The engine basically had stopped, and it was just silence, just the sound of water rushing into this boat. Also, Billy Joe had stopped yelling Mayday because clearly the boat had lost power and the radio didn't work. And unfortunately, before the power cut out, nobody had heard any of Billy Joe's Mayday calls. So nobody knew where they were, nobody knew they were sinking, and without power, they had no way to communicate to anybody. They were totally alone. So Nathan, Billy Joe, and the others did the only thing they could do. They went up to the main deck, they grabbed their inflatable life raft, they blew it up, chucked it over the side, they grabbed as many supplies as they could, put it in the raft, they all made sure they had all their flotation on, and then they jumped into the life raft, abandoning the sinking fishing boat. Now, once all 4 men were safely inside of this life raft, they were not as panicked as you might think they would be, because they had put enough food and water in this raft to last them at least several days. They all again had their life vests on, so proper flotation, and even though nobody responded to those Mayday calls, it wasn't impossible to think that maybe somebody had heard the Mayday calls and they just had not called back. You know, maybe there was a rescue operation coming to their location right now. They didn't know, but it felt plausible that they could be rescued. They would just need to kind of ration out their supplies and stay optimistic. However, their optimism quickly faded when, after only being in this life raft for 30 minutes, right as the sun was starting to come up, Nathan began to hear a strange sound. It was coming from somewhere in the life raft. He couldn't quite place the sound, and so at first he kind of tried to ignore it, but then he noticed the life raft was becoming softer, and then he realized the sound he heard was a small hiss. The raft had a leak. And even though the 4 men were able to trace the sound of this leak to the actual puncture, they didn't have a patch kit or any meaningful way to patch up this hole. And so all they could do was just put their hands over this leak and do their best to seal it. But it didn't stop the air from coming out. It just delayed it. And so over the next hour, again, as the sun is just coming up on the second day of their big fishing trip, the raft finally completely deflated, and all 4 men were suddenly bobbing in the freezing cold ocean, surrounded by the wreckage of their sinking fishing boat. And so eventually, the men grabbed the biggest piece of wood from the wreckage that came floating by, and it was buoyant enough that it kind of served as like a makeshift raft, but it wasn't buoyant enough to hold all 4 of them at once, which meant, you know, they had to take turns resting on this raft, and then they'd have to get back in the ocean and kind of wait their turn again. I mean, totally miserable. And as this was happening, they just stared at the hull of their sinking fishing boat that was still poking up out of the ocean, just drift farther and farther away from them because the current was pretty strong. And as they watched their ship just kind of disappear into the distance, and they're just kind of drifting out into the middle of the ocean, they were all just stunned into silence. They could not believe how this had happened, and so quickly. And also, what were they going to do? I mean, they're in the worst possible situation here. It just didn't seem possible that they could actually survive this. Now, for reference, even though the men had salvaged a lot of their food and water from the sinking life raft, and they had their flotation devices on, that didn't protect them from hypothermia. It wouldn't matter if it was super warm outside. What mattered is the ocean was really cold. And because they couldn't stay on that raft, they had to keep cycling through, going back in the ocean over and over again. It was just a matter of time before they would get hypothermia. And sometimes hypothermia can kick in just a couple of hours. I mean, we're not talking days here. This is going to be quick. And all these guys knew that. And so as these men were forced to have these really morbid discussions around who's going to stay in the water and who's going to stay on the raft, Nathan made a drastic decision. Nathan, being by far the biggest physically out of the 4 men, he knew that if he wasn't there right now, the other 3 could easily fit on their makeshift raft and stay out of the water, delaying hypothermia, thereby increasing the odds that they got rescued. And so Nathan did what he always did, and he turned to his younger brother, who he looked up to so much, who he just wanted to help all the time, and Nathan told him, I'm going to swim to the wreckage. I'm going to swim back to the hull of our sinking ship, and I'm going to fashion my own makeshift raft. That way you guys can have this one, and I'll have my own, and we can all get out of here in one piece. Now, keep in mind, it was fairly obvious that the hull of the sinking ship, which was barely visible near the horizon, was at least 3 miles away, just from their own rough calculations. So this is a monster swim to get to that. And so immediately, Billy Joe and the other 3 were like, no, that is a suicide mission. You cannot do that. Do not swim to the hull. You're not going to make it. Now, just to give some additional context here, if you're not familiar with just how challenging swimming in the open ocean is, I'm going to give you my limited experience. So when I was in the military, we had to do one 5.5 mile open ocean swim. And then also we did a whole bunch of 2 mile ocean swims. And even though we were allowed to use amazing wetsuits and fins, we had a swim partner with us. We had the land nearby to use as a reference to make sure we're going the right direction. We had food, we had water, we were in great shape. Even with all of that, open ocean swims are miserable. You get all this salt in your mouth and your nose, you start cramping and chafing. I mean, it takes hours and hours and hours to swim some of these distances, and you're constantly fighting against the waves. I mean, it is an absolute chore swimming in the open ocean, again, even with all the right stuff in place. And you gotta remember, Nathan is this big guy, he's got this big bulky life vest on that's gonna make it hard to swim. He doesn't have fins, he doesn't have a wetsuit, and he's got no landmarks around him, to make sure he's going in a straight line. Typically, when you're swimming in the ocean, you're constantly looking at the land or some other landmark to make sure you're going in the right direction. He wouldn't have had that. And also, it's this unknown distance he's covering, and there could be predators in the water. I mean, there's so many barriers here that basically there was like a 0% chance this swim would be successful. But Nathan totally understood what he was really doing here. He didn't really know if he was actually going to make it to that boat. Frankly, that was not really the point. What he was really doing was choosing to sacrifice himself to potentially save his brother and the other two. And so even though they were telling him, do not go, do not swim in that direction, you're not going to make it, Nathan just turned to his brother Billy Joe and said, I love you. And then he turned and began swimming. And by some miracle, 11 hours later, right as the sun was setting, Nathan was still alive and still swimming, and he did reach the sinking boat that still had its hull poking out of the water. Now, when Nathan got to the sinking ship, he was almost dead from dehydration, from hypothermia. I mean, he's miserable, but he's made it to his destination completely against all odds, and he climbed up onto this hull, and he found a spot on the hull of the ship that supported his weight, and he managed to tie himself using some rope or maybe his life vest to the hull, so he was anchored in place. And then he didn't get to sleep because the whole time he's thinking, this thing could sink under the water at any point and it will drag me with it because I'm tied to it, or he could just drift off of it if his rigging kind of came undone, if he was asleep. And so all night, beyond exhausted, he's just holding on to this hull, not really sure what's going to happen, but here he is, just waiting it out. And then finally, when the sun came up that next morning, as Nathan looked around him, he's in the middle of the ocean, he sees in the direction he had come from this pillar of smoke coming up over the horizon. And so Nathan, he rubs his eyes, he can't believe it. He's thinking, there's no way, there's already a ship out here. We're in the middle of nowhere. But sure enough, slowly but surely, this massive freighter ship came into view that was very far away. It's not near Nathan, but he can see it clear as day. And where this ship was basically circling was roughly where he believed his brother and the other two fishermen were still floating. And so he's thinking, oh my goodness, the freighter is going to save them, and then it's going to come save me. And so Nathan just clung onto the hull and watched as this freighter made these big slow loops right around that same area. And then the freighter came to a full stop, and it appeared to lower something down into the water. It seemed very much like a full-blown rescue operation. And then about 3 hours after he first spotted this freighter, the freighter began to move again, and this time directly towards Nathan. Nathan was so relieved he could practically cry. But instead what he did is he thought, they're going to be here in a minute. I'm finally just going to close my eyes and go to sleep. And so he put his head down on the hull, looked one more time at the freighter, and then closed his eyes. Now, Nathan would be rescued, but it would not be by that huge freighter ship. Nathan eventually had opened his eyes after closing them for a second, and he saw this freighter that had been coming straight for him, at some point had kind of deviated and gone in the wrong direction and then vanished over the horizon, never to be seen again. And it would take 3 more days before a separate ship happened to find Nathan, they scooped him up, and they rescued him. But even though Nathan had been really crushed when that freighter had gone the wrong way, he held on to this idea that, that freighter had clearly rescued his brother and the other 2 fishermen. And certainly, even if they couldn't find him, they would go back and they would tell the authorities that Nathan is out there. He swam back to the hull of the ship. We got to go find him. And so certainly a rescue effort would be on the way. And it was true. A rescue boat had come out and found Nathan. So everything seemed to be tracking. And when Nathan woke up inside of his hospital room back on land, his friends and family were all by his bedside, and he's looking around. He can't believe he survived. And the first thing he asks is, how's my brother? How are the other 2 fishermen? And why didn't that freighter pick me up too? And at this, all the people in the room just kind of looked at Nathan with a very confused look on their face. And eventually they asked him a question that made Nathan burst out in tears. They said, "What freighter?" It would turn out Billy Joe and the other two fishermen were still missing at this point, and nobody had heard a thing about some big freighter in the area. As far as anybody knew, at least in Nathan's family, that freighter ship did not exist. The search for Billy Joe and the remaining two crew members went on for weeks and weeks, and while the active search out on the ocean was going on, the Coast Guard and police were searching through every record they could possibly find of basically any ship that was even roughly in the area where Nathan and the others had been. But despite looking everywhere, there was basically no sign that any ship of any kind had been there beyond the rescue operation that eventually scooped up Nathan. And so again, it seemed very likely that that freighter ship didn't exist. And, it was possible that Nathan, in his very deteriorated state, had maybe hallucinated it. Although Nathan was adamant, he definitely saw that ship. It did not feel like, a multi-hour long hallucination. It felt like he was watching a ship. He was sure of it. But again, there was just no proof, and so nobody knew what to think of that. And then eventually, even though there was this huge search going on, there was just no sign of Billy Joe or the others, and so eventually the search was called off, and unfortunately, the presumption was Billy Joe and the other two were now dead. 5 months later, on the afternoon of October 5th, 1990, the phone rang inside of Nathan's sister's home. Now, by this point, the victims' families had all tried to sort of restart their lives following this tragedy, but deep down, none of them could truly accept that Billy Joe and the other two fishermen were just gone. They just couldn't do it. It was too soon. It felt like, any moment they were going to get news that, they had been rescued by some freighter ship or something. And so anytime a phone rang in any of these families' homes, it's like they would rush to the phone with the sense of hope that this time it's going to be different. Their loved ones are going to be okay, only to obviously be crushed when that was not the case. But on this day, on October 5th, that phone call that came through in Nathan's sister's home, that one was different. When Nathan's mother picked up this phone call in Nathan's sister's home, she answered it and said hello, and right away she thought, oh, this has to be a wrong number, because the person who was calling was speaking in rapid Spanish, and she didn't understand what they were saying. But as she was about to hang up, the caller, intermittently throughout their rapid Spanish, began saying something in English that Nathan's mother could understand, and it totally shocked her. The caller kept saying Nathan's sister's name over and over again, followed by Nathan's sister's phone number, like on repeat, the name, the phone number in English over and over and over again. And Nathan's mom is so caught off guard by this that she just listened, not even sure what to do. And then before she could ask any follow-up questions, the caller cut the line and the phone call was over. And then a few minutes later, another phone rang in a home that was not far away from Nathan's sister's home. And this other home belonged to the boat owner who Billy Joe had rented the fishing boat from that unfortunately sank and caused this whole tragedy. And so this boat owner, he picks up the phone, he answers it, and just like the call that had come through in Nathan's sister's house, this call was the same. It was somebody calling, speaking rapid Spanish, and the boat owner was about to hang up when he heard something that he understood because it was in English. And what he heard was his own name followed by his phone number over and over and over again. Basically the same type of call that Nathan's mom had just heard. And then before the boat owner could ask any questions, the line went dead. Now, one phone call like this, you could chalk up to maybe a prank or a wrong number or just a really weird coincidence. But to have those two calls happen within minutes of each other and basically take on the exact same form, but different names and different phone numbers, it just seemed way too coincidental to not be somehow connected to the missing fishermen. Because the link between these two households where these calls came in was the doomed fishing trip. And these calls did not stop. Every few weeks after this first time these calls came through, the phone would ring in Nathan's sister's house or in the boat owner's house, and it would be the same thing all over again. Rapid Spanish followed by either Nathan's sister's name and then her phone number, or the boat owner's name and his phone number. Just like that for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so as soon as this started happening, Nathan's family and the boat owner, they figured out they were both getting these weird calls, and they contacted authorities, which kind of restarted the search for Billy Joe and the missing fishermen, because now it seemed very plausible that maybe Nathan really had seen a freighter, and that freighter really had picked up Billy Joe and the others, and maybe they had been taken to another country, a Spanish-speaking country, and maybe people were trying to get in touch with the families now to get them back home. Or, of course, there could be a negative side to this, that maybe they were captured by some rogue vessel and were being held by these people who were calling. I mean, there's any number of theories, but it made authorities wonder, hey, what's going on here? And so authorities got in touch with Mexican authorities and other Spanish-speaking country authorities and tried to figure out if there was any chance that there was, a vessel out there around the time that Billy Joe and the others were missing that in theory could have maybe illegally been in that area or something. But despite this kind of exhaustive effort to kind of look again to see if maybe there was a freighter in that area, there was just no evidence that there was. It made no sense, but the authorities said, look, we have no idea what these calls are about. We still do not think that freighter or any ship that even resembled a freighter was out there. We still believe that Billy Joe and the others are dead. But as for the victims' families, they just didn't buy that. They really believed that these strange phone calls were somehow connected to Billy Joe and the missing fishermen. Specifically, these calls must signal that Billy Joe and the others were still alive. They just had no evidence to support that. That is, until March 6th, 1991, so almost a year after the doomed fishing vessel sank and Billy Joe and the others went missing. On that day, the phone rang inside of Nathan's sister's home, and she answered it, and it was the voice who spoke in rapid Spanish, but this time they spoke in perfect English, and all they said was, "I'm bringing him home." And then the line went dead. And Nathan's sister screamed and she yelled for her husband to call police. They contacted the authorities. And again, it kind of brought back to life the search for Billy Joe and the missing fishermen. And then after this call, there was a near constant presence of authorities on the Georgia coastline, basically looking out to the water, waiting, hoping for Billy Joe and the others to return. But unfortunately, they never did. And following that last phone call where the caller spoke in perfect English and said, "I'm bringing him home," after that, the call stopped. And so to this day, no one has ever been able to actually figure out what happened to Billy Joe and the other two fishermen. They are presumed dead at this point, but there's this one nagging question that surrounds the whole story, and that is, what did Nathan see? Was that actually a freighter picking up Billy Joe and the others? And if so, what did they do with them? Or was Nathan just hallucinating? It's entirely possible, but Nathan has always said he knows what he saw, and that was not a hallucination. As for the families of the victims, they still firmly believe that their loved ones are still out there, and someday they will come back home, and the families just hope they're alive long enough to be there for the reunion. So that's going to do it. If you enjoyed today's story and you want more strange, dark, and mysterious content, keep in mind we have a whole slew of podcasts under the Ballen Studios umbrella. All you have to do is go to any podcast platform that you like, search for Ballen Studios, and you can find MrBallen Podcast, you can find Mr. Ballen's Medical Mysteries, Run Fool, Bedtime Stories. All of these are available right now. I mean, you got hundreds of hours of strange, dark, and mysterious content to go binge. So again, look up Ballen Studios on any podcast platform, and boom, you're in. Thank you so much for the support. Until next time, see ya. Wait, don't go anywhere. If you're looking for more strange, dark, and mysterious videos, click here.